Hi, my name is Michael Boldin. I'm the founder of the 10th Amendment Center, which you can find online at 10thamendmentcenter.com. A couple of really interesting and exciting news events on the 10th Amendment state sovereignty front this week. First of all, down south in Louisiana, Senate Concurrent Resolution number 2, which is from Senator A.G. Crow, SCR2, passed the House with flying colors. I believe the vote was 59-12, and they had concurred with the Senate, which had previously voted 32-0. This resolution is reaffirming the state of Louisiana's sovereignty under the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution. And in that resolution, they're calling on the federal government to cease and desist any and all activities which are outside the scope of their constitutionally delegated powers, and that is quite a lot. So this is really great news, and I hope anyone down in Louisiana will contact Senator Crow and those who supported this resolution and congratulate them and let them know that you support their work. Louisiana is now the 7th state to have had both houses of their respective legislature pass such a resolution. They join Alaska, Idaho, North Dakota, South Dakota, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. All 7 states are now reaffirming their sovereignty under the 10th Amendment. And a lot of people ask me, well, what's the point? Aren't these resolutions just non-binding? Aren't they just political posturing or just a statement? Maybe it sounds good, but what does it really do? And I think there's really 2 big things that can come out of this. First of all, it's education. This is something that we live in a society that is so far opposite of a constitutional society that it's important just to take some beginning steps, some shots across the bow to say, well, there's supposed to be something different. The federal government should be acting in a little different way. And we now have 36 states around the country, left, right, and center, whether it's Massachusetts or Oklahoma or Minnesota, where legislators and people are in support of resolutions supporting and affirming the 10th Amendment. 7 have passed, 3 have failed, but there's still a significant number of people that are calling for this to happen. So a lot of people are beginning to talk about it. You see some reports in the mainstream media even. So the first effect of this is that it gets the discussion out into the public sphere. That's really where we need to start. We got to get people talking about the proper role of federal government, the principle that the federal government should be limited in its powers, as it says so clearly in the 10th Amendment, and not unlimited. That nationalizing everything from banks to auto companies to your health care is not something that's authorized to the federal government by the Constitution. So that's the first thing. We get it out into the public sphere. And then the second thing is we can learn what actually happens when a movement like this gets attention. And all we need to look to is the Real ID Act of 2005 for a really good blueprint of what can and hopefully will happen. That law created what many would call a national ID card. For various reasons, I personally saw it as an unconstitutional piece of legislation, and many other people around the country clearly agree with that position because they called on their state governments to issue resolutions and binding legislation refusing to enact it, just simply refusing. They weren't calling on federal politicians necessarily to repeal, although they may have been. But without getting effect along those lines, people went to their state governments and said, well, just simply don't go along with it, refuse it, whatever the reason. Sometimes they refuse it based on funding, sometimes they refuse it based on privacy reasons. But the bottom line is early in 2007, Maine issued a non-binding resolution saying that this piece of legislation from the Bush administration was outside the scope of the Constitution and they wouldn't go along with it. Shortly after that, Utah got on board with something similar, and more states got on with resolutions and binding legislation saying that they would not implement the Real ID Act. I believe it was somewhere around 24 states, possibly a little bit more. But under this great pressure, the federal government didn't really push back at all. They had to back down, not once, not twice, but 3 times. The first time they delayed the implementation date, said, okay, well, we'll give you a little bit longer. And more states got on board, resisting it, and they had to back off a second time. Okay, we'll back off and we'll delay the implementation date again. But as more and more states and more people are saying, no, we don't want this unconstitutional law, we don't want this Real ID Act for various reasons, it turns out that the federal government just recently, here in June, had to take a position where they publicly stated that they were looking to ways to repeal or just simply replace it, just ignore the laws if it doesn't exist and replace it with something else. Now, although I don't think what they'll come up with in its replacement is good, it still gives us a practical example of how action on a state-by-state level, saying no to unconstitutional activity by the federal government, can and does work. So if it is an individual law like Real ID or gun laws in Tennessee or Montana, or broad-based resolutions like we see in so many states just telling the federal government to look to the 10th Amendment and the Constitution for its authority to do something, we actually have practical examples of how if you support this and you pressure your state legislators, you can actually have some real effect in the future here. And that leads me to another great news item that came out this week, and more on the individual law-by-law basis. The state of Arizona, the Senate there passed this week and concurred with the House HCR 2014, which is the Health Care Freedom Act. And this is going to put on the ballot in 2010 to have the people choose whether they basically want to opt out of any upcoming federal health care program. It's going to allow them to choose if they want to say no to penalties on people for buying private health care, if they want to say no to forcing individuals or employers to participate in any particular health care program. Basically just saying, well, if you're going to pass a nationalized health care program, the state of Arizona is not going to go along with it. I don't know how the vote's going to come out. I don't think anyone does. But it's really some exciting news to see another front in resistance to the federal government. We have Real ID that's actually worked. It's gotten the federal government to back off. We've got Firearms Freedom Acts that have passed in both Montana and Tennessee and are being considered in maybe 24 other states that are telling the federal government to back off on gun registration in some areas. And we've got medical marijuana laws passing all over the country, which are in direct contravention to unconstitutional federal drug laws that say marijuana is illegal no matter what. And now we see the beginning of an anti-national health care movement down in Arizona. And all these things give me hope, real hope for real change in the future, where people can, on a local level, choose what's best for them, and they can address their state government to help them actually say no and resist the federal government. So two really exciting things. I hope you'll contact your legislators and encourage them to do something similar, whether it's for health care, gun rights, marijuana, or whatever is important to you. Call on your state government to do what it's supposed to do and have some backbone and say no to the federal government. And get some more attention to these types of moves, and we're going to see a lot of positive things come in the future. And that's all I have for the week. I hope to see you here again soon, and please stop by 10thamendmentcenter.com. Looking forward to all your feedback and comments as always.